What caught my eye recently, Ruchir, was a piece that you wrote entitled "The Comeback Nation. U.S. Economic Supremacy Has Repeatedly Proven Declinists Wrong." Was that written in response to what we're going through right now as a planet? I guess on a relative basis, the U.S. is usually leads the way and probably going to lead the way out of this, I would think. When was that written? In response to this, or was it even before the current pandemic?
Hi, Joe. I wrote that piece, in fact, in February, and then as it was going to press, we got this massive outbreak, and I tailored it a bit to incorporate what had happened, but I find that the conclusions that I came up in that piece, which was supposed to be a very long look at how the U.S. economy has done over the last few decades, I found myself even more convinced about the fact that we need to have a piece out there which argues against this declinist kind of mindset. As I've been saying, that the last decade was clearly America's decade. The facts are all mentioned in that piece. America's share in the global economy went up from 23 to 25%. America as a financial superpower was never this dominant in its history as it was last decade. If you look at the share of global stock market cap, if you look at share of global transactions which are conducted in the U.S. dollars. So this was an unprecedented decade for American economic and financial supremacy. And yet, among the foreign policy establishment, the narrative continues to be how America is in decline and how it needs to cede more space to China, Russia, other powers. And so this was really meant as a counter to that. Now, of course, we have the outbreak of the crisis, and there's a lot of focus on America and how America is at the epicenter of this crisis. And what does this really mean? Does this sort of mean that there's been so much negative press about how America has handled this pandemic? It was too late in terms of controlling it. I don't want to get into that. It's a bit early for me to get into that. But what I do argue is that in economic and financial terms, there is zero evidence that this coronavirus is disproportionately hitting America or that America is going to come out of this looking any weaker. If anything, it has once again shown how dependent the world is on the dollar standard, where the U.S. dollar is so dominant, and also that this is hitting all economies almost equally. And so it's not as if the American economy is going to decline more than other economies. That's not the evidence I have so far.
There's reason to believe that. You make some other good points that that a lot of the areas, sectors, parts of the world that you thought were undervalued to start before the pandemic are even more undervalued. So that makes you bullish on some of those areas. But you're also seeing a bounce in some of the leading sectors, which makes you think that they may lead afterwards. I guess the simplest way to ask my question, Ruchir, is when we do get back to some sense of normalcy, will the United States be the best house in a bad neighborhood because we're all dealing with a different world at that point, or will we be a really nice house in a pretty nice neighborhood?
Right. Yeah. So I do feel that whenever a new bull market begins, the leadership changes. This has just been the history of investing, for the last century or so. So I do think that in a new bull market, the leaders will be different, and America's had a fantastic decade, and American outperformance versus the rest of the world is still at a 100-year high, which is that the American stock market, in both price terms and valuation terms, has never been this expensively valued compared to the rest of the world. So I do think coming out of this, America will do fine, but the rest of the world, in terms of the stock market, will possibly do better. Look at emerging markets today. Emerging markets today are about more than 40% below their long-term trend. And from these kind of depressed levels, you always end up getting a pretty powerful bull market over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. The last time we were this depressed was 2001, 2002, and then you got this sort of very strong bull market. So, of course, history may not repeat itself, but here's a very simple calculation. If emerging markets over the next 3 to 5 years are to just return back to the trend line, the annualized returns we can expect over the next 3 years is about 20% a year. If the return to trend happens over a 5 year time horizon, the annualized sort of returns will be 12 to 13%. Similarly, the American stock market today is about 15 to 20% below its very long-term trend. On a long-term basis, over the last century, the American stock market has compounded at about 7% a year in real terms. We're about 15% or so roughly below that. So yes, we are below the long-term trend, but nothing as depressed as some of the international markets like emerging markets are. So for the next 3 to 5 years, you do expect these kind of markets to outperform, even though America also should stage a comeback over the next 3 to 5 years.